Even Joanie Lamb's nephew has spoken forward after years of silence. What he is disclosing is not only intimate but also highly explosive. His daring move has revealed long-buried facts that many had assumed would remain hidden. With the doors closed doorways that shocked the public, this was the reality that nobody was prepared for. How much did he reveal? What gives? What impact will it have on Daystar and the Lamb family? You're going to discover it soon. It has everything began with sadness, an overwhelming sense of genuine sorrow. Marcus Lamb's untimely death in 2021 rocked the Daystar family to their core. It was deeply personal for Joanie Lamb, who was his wife and a ministry partner for many years. She did lost more than simply a spouse. She parted ways with her co-leader, her rock, and her best friend. Many assumed Joni would need some space to grieve, recharge, and absorb the enormity of the situation at first. And initially, it appeared as though she might. However, changes began shortly following the funeral. Gently at first, and later with greater prominence. Whispers were the first sounds. A family friend and marital counselor named Dr. Doug Weiss was spotted spending time with Joni. Later on, the rumblings became conversations. At long last, word got out. Joni had a romantic partner, getting serious quickly rather than merely dating casually. Rebecca Lamb was the most taken aback by it, though. Rebecca and her parents had a strong bond from the start. Her mother was an inspiration to her because of her faith, strength, and honesty, and her father was someone she greatly admired. It was more than that for the Lamb family. For individuals all across the globe, it represented Christian principles and served as a public ministry. And legacy was important in Rebecca's opinion from the beginning. Rebecca was confused and upset when her mother began seeing someone new shortly after Marcus's death. It was wrong. Joni wasn't there. Furthermore, the vast majority of in any way that paid tribute to the loss they were all still experiencing. In the beginning, she made an effort to be delicate. She went to her mom with empathy in the hopes of talking it out, but things didn't work out that way. On the defense, Joni was, as if she had erected a barrier between herself and the world. No amount of worry would sway her. How quickly things were progressing was something she preferred not to discuss. She appeared to be merely attempting to progress in her mind. However, Rebecca perceived it as the mending process was being completely ignored by her mom. As far as she was concerned, her mom was ignoring the need of healing altogether. We felt hurried. It had the air of a romantic rejection. Plus, Rebecca couldn't control the increasing unease within her. There was more to this than her mother's romantic relationships. The implications for the family as a whole and the ministry they had worked so hard to establish were at the heart of the matter. Who would respond? How do you think the Christian community would react? Given Joni's apparent rapid progress, what does it reveal about their principles? Marcus had not been absent for long. Was anyone considering the visual and tactile aspects of this? Rebecca felt increasingly marginalized the more she voiced her opinions. Once warm and welcoming, Joni now seems distant and uncaring. The gap between them widened as Rebecca made more and more efforts to connect. The fact that Joni's friends and family, particularly those closest to Doug, were supportive of the relationship, didn't help matters. They made it appear as though God had decreed this fresh section. Rebecca, on the other hand, felt as though everyone was trying to ignore or downplay the gravity of the loss they had suffered. Rebecca truly didn't want to dampen her mother's joy. She merely wanted a tranquil environment where they could all relax, contemplate, and respect Marcus, and to think about the broader context of their next moves. However, that viewpoint encountered opposition. Joni was determined not to ease up. No need for her to justify herself, she thought. It was important to her that her daughter not question her. Rebecca was taken aback by the severity of the heartbreak she experienced. Moving on too quickly wasn't the only issue here. It dealt with the disintegration of a precious thing, an unbreakable bond between a mother and her daughter, a family's shared religion, and the spiritual heritage that Marcus bequeathed to his successors. For Rebecca, that bequest meant the world. It served as their basis. There seemed to be no one around to safeguard it anymore. Accordingly, Joni continued on with her intentions and her new romance. Standing at a hard crossroads, Rebecca tried to love her mother, who suddenly felt like a stranger, cherish her father's memory, and safeguard the values of the ministry. At that instant, tragedy, family, and legacy came crashing down, and from that point on, everything changed. It was the night when a glimmer of optimism preceded a burning need. This was not an instantaneous event. The peculiarity of family breakups lies in that very fact. They begin with a glance, a pause, an unspoken dialogue that ought to have taken place but did not. What started off as a small worry for Rebecca Lamb eventually became something far larger. However, what began in secret soon became something far larger, and the Lamb family was no longer able to keep it hidden. The months following Marcus Lamb's death were a time of adjustment for everyone. Once again, Joni was conducting interviews. The Daystar crew maintained the network's functionality. There was dignity and strength in the public display of grief by the family. But there was an air of mystery behind the scenes. It was too real for Rebecca to turn a blind eye to. The turning point came when Joni began dating Doug Weiss. It was understated at first. A series of casual texts and infrequent meetups quickly escalated into something far more serious. It was too much for Rebecca to handle. Only a year had passed since her father's departure. Nonetheless, her mother was already making plans for the future with someone else. It was upsetting, hurtful, and humiliating, not only to Marcus but to the whole family and the principles they had always worked so hard to preserve. She made an effort to conceal her worries. She spoke with immediate relatives, and she prayed. Her activity included keeping a journal. Am I being too sensitive, too protective? She wondered, but something inside her ached with each new post, appearance, or statement from Joni and Doug. There was no envy. There was sadness. It was depressing. Above all else, it was terror, worry that they were drifting apart as a family. Intentionally causing trouble wasn't Rebecca's goal. She was afraid she would embarrass her mother or draw attention to their hidden suffering. But as the friendship progressed with Joni, Rebecca felt pressured to either keep quiet or reveal the truth. And each passing day made it more difficult to remain silent. Reattempting to communicate with Joni just made everything worse for Rebecca. Things went downhill from there. Listening to Rebecca's ideas was out of the question for Joni. No, she mistook it for criticism. You don't understand, and this were some of her remarks that effectively ended it. I am following God's will, her mother said, and Rebecca felt her mother's distance from her deepen her grief. It wasn't merely Joni's hasty choice to move on that hurt. It was her complete indifference to the fact that her actions carried significant emotional consequences. The loss of Marcus had barely registered with the family. Remarrying was already on Joni's mind. Just keep moving forward, no stopping to think. It had progressed beyond a purely personal level. The public was informed. Noticed by viewers, the backers started to probe for clarification. Once proud of Daystar's togetherness, the Christian community now began to whisper. Rebecca anticipated it. Upon hearing the news, she anticipated that many would examine Joni's decisions. They succeeded. The internet went downhill. Many people wrote comments. Why was she moving on so quickly? Many wanted to know, why was Doug chosen? What gives? Not all were rude. Not everyone was. However, the position was already precarious, and all of it made it worse. Despite her repeated attempts to voice her worries within the family, Rebecca remained silent in public at first. As a daughter, she felt a sense of responsibility, although as an individual with strong ties to the ministry, it was her home from childhood. From the very beginning, she had observed her parents constructing it, and now it seemed like everything was falling apart. It was all because nobody wanted to stop and ask, "Are we okay?" Rebecca felt even more alone the more she demanded responsibility. She felt her place in the family dwindling. Meetings were skipped over her. Choices were made apart from her. It had progressed beyond an emotional state. It was a big deal. Members of the company has lost its sense of camaraderie. It was as grand as a throne. Rebecca now saw Joni as untouchable. Even Rebecca's older brother, Jonathan, was experiencing the same thing. He had been considered Daystar's obvious successor for quite some time. However, Jonathan's opinion appeared to fade in importance as Joni's bond with Doug grew stronger. He and Rebecca were being gently drawn to the periphery of a narrative they had collaborated on. Rebecca stopped attempting to act after a while. Eventually, she started to relax and tell her truth. Recommendations to acquaintances. Without wanting to tarnish her mother's good name, she cautiously and quietly offered her perspective, revealing the reality of what had been going on behind the scenes. It was impossible to close that door once it was opened. She had carried her personal worries for a long time, slowly started to gain attention. Mother and daughter weren't the only ones affected by the rift. It was a part of the ministry. Even long-term employees started to notice the change, convey their bewilderment in a written submission. It became increasingly apparent that Rebecca and Jonathan were missing as Joni and Doug emerged as the ministry's new public face. Folks started asking, "Where are the Lamb kids? Why aren't they speaking? What happened to the family we used to know?" Rebecca wasn't privy to all the details, but she was aware that something had broken, and nobody was ready to acknowledge it. When Joni openly requested Rebecca's support for her impending wedding, it was the last straw. A brief message, some encouraging remarks, but Rebecca was unable to complete it. I don't, because her hatred of her mother stemmed from a lack of faith that this was God's will for their lives, rather than resentment or bitterness. She was troubled by the situation, and did not wish to lie for the sake of maintaining a false front. Thus she declined. As a result of such choice, she lost more beyond her expectations. Following this, there was an ear-piercing quiet. Calls from Joni ceased. Very few messages came in from other relatives. The new season's detractors now included Rebecca, and she learnt the hard way that being alone is the worst in the ministry, where teamwork is paramount. Rebecca, though, remained steadfast in her choice despite the agony. Avoiding her mother's pain was her first priority. Her goal was to keep the family united. She merely desired for someone to recognize the gravity of the situation, realizing that not everyone was content with diving headfirst into the future. Additionally, she wished for everyone to understand that actions carried out in the name of religion do not necessarily constitute their righteousness. I can still feel the crack. It might remain that way forever. However, vengeance was never at the root of Rebecca's change from private to public concern. Truth, love, legacy, and the prospect that healing is attainable even in the most devastated areas were the themes that had been simmering for months. Every missed opportunity for communication, every uncomfortable moment of quiet, and every instance in which Rebecca attempted to contact her mother but received either a distant silence or a redirection. At last, in one excruciating, memorable moment, it all culminated. The confrontation that sent shockwaves through the world. The event took place in May of 2023, a few weeks prior to Joanie Lamb's wedding to Dr. Doug Weiss. At that moment, Rebecca's anger had transformed into something more substantial, more than simply melancholy or worry, more like layers of anguish. Marcus, her father, had passed away only 2 years before. The agony remained. It had been overshadowed by her bewilderment, wrath, and the profound feeling that her loved ones were evaporating from her grasp. Oh, Rebecca had exhausted every possible option. Calm chats, one-on-one messaging, lengthy correspondence. Her heart had sung. She was patient. In an effort to be calm, she had even contemplated remaining mute. However, little altered. The courtship, the wedding, and Jonie's public appearances beside Doug were all proceeding as planned. As if nothing was wrong, Weiss. However, within the family, everything was amiss. Even Rebecca had to admit that she was acting now. It wasn't meant to be a dramatic scenario that day. It wasn't Rebecca's intention. She didn't enter the house with the intention of confronting her mom today. However, something snapped inside her when she noticed Joni in the hallway, smiling as if nothing were wrong. The tension had been building for far too long. The phrases that were languishing in her throat at last begged to be released. "No, Mom, I think we should have a chat." Incredulous, Joni glanced up, but her face quickly became inflexible. Her anticipation was palpable. Attempting to maintain her composure, Rebecca paused to catch her breath. "For months, I have remained silent. Attempts have been made to comprehend, but something is off about this wedding, and the haste with which they are entering a new relationship. Under no circumstances would Joni cross her arms, not for the sake of the family, the ministry, or even you. This has previously been discussed with you, Rebecca." With an uncontrollable rise in her voice, Rebecca firmly stated no. "Neither of us has spoken to the other. You have kicked me out. You pretended I was being overly sentimental or theatrical every time I brought it up. Mom, this is for real. We love this family. Here we carry on Dad's work. The words soared through the atmosphere like bolts of lightning, and for an instant, they remained silent. With a quiver in her voice, Rebecca inched closer. Attempting to disrupt your life is not my intention. May happiness envelop you. Indeed, I do. However, how do you know for sure? Is this what God desires when you haven't even given yourself a chance to relax and mend? You've had very little room to mourn, Dad. You seem to be moving at a breakneck pace presently. Who are we fooling? Johnny's teeth were clenched. Her brow furrowed. My experience suffers from grief. You have no idea how hard it has been for me. Are you under the impression that I have just moved on? Attempting to stay alive has consumed me for the past 2 years, that is, until I met someone who gets me. This person is on a similar path. I'm making progress at last. Going ahead? Rebecca inquired, her voice betraying her level of doubt. For how much? No one is sticking together anymore. Jonathan is feeling alienated. My gut tells me that Mother, I have lost her. Now we are no longer communicating with you. Why? Because we aren't celebrating your new romance. Johnny had a raspy voice. It is not accurate. I agree with you, Mom. In response, Rebecca fired back. You've evolved, and that is, not positively. Oh, how you listened. Your leadership style was once elegant. You and Doug are the center of attention now. As if the rest of humanity has lost all significance. No sound. As soon as Rebecca sensed the consequences of her words hung in the balance, and she despised that they had reached this point. It had to be spoken, though. Somebody had to tell it like it was. Joni averted her gaze momentarily. After that, she stated in a distant tone, "You're simply angry because you don't get to manage this. I have the right to be happy and to go on." Rebecca, I never said you couldn't be. Rebecca responded, her eyes welling up with tears. When asked about moving on, Joni responded, "But moving on doesn't mean burning everything behind you." Those remarks would utterly crush Rebecca's heart. Rebecca remained motionless as she proclaimed, "I don't need your approval. I don't need you telling me how to live my life." As is typical for her mother, her voice is replete with loving knowledge, seemed far away, unfamiliar, like the voice of an unknown person. The chasm had become so wide, she realized for the first time. This went beyond a simple argument. It was a break. Once quite near, a mother and daughter could no longer hear one another over the din. Feeling humiliated, hurt and let down. Rather than furious, Rebecca bolted out of the room, her expression betraying her disbelief. The door was not slammed by her. A scream eluded her. Staying there felt like attempting to save something that had already crumbled, so she simply left. Every word, glance, and moment leading up to this was reviewed by her that night, as she sat alone. Not only had her mother left her, but the version of her family she had always imagined had also vanished, leaving her bewildered and abandoned. The argument did not center on any particular relationship or decision. The tragedy of seeing a loved one slip away into a life you don't recognize was at the center of the story. As her mother attempted to reinvent her own destiny, the protagonist's daughter fought for the honor of a family name. Plus, it centered on the unfiltered reality that families may be fragile, even the strongest ones. After that, Rebecca started to distance herself. Meetings were missed by her. The ministry team tried to contact her, but she ignored them. There were no simple solutions to her pain. It was complex. New Year pledges. Joni, as far as Rebecca could tell, also refrained from making contact. Like they'd both said everything that needed saying, and still, it seemed like nothing they said had moved anyone. Still, that showdown was significant, despite the suffering. It was a flash of insight, a realization, and while it did leave scars, it also revealed everything. No more masking or suppressing emotions. Everything changed when they confronted, along with nobody in the Lamb loved ones would ever forget it. It was as if you were walking through fog in the days following the confrontation. I slept poorly, Rebecca Lamb. Her emotion-filled voice kept repeating each word that had been spoken. The tone her mom used, unfeeling and emotionally aloof,
Wrench.
with that last sentence resonating in her mind. Your blessing is not required of me. After that fateful night, her heart was shattered, and she never felt the same. Good day, Russell. Unanimity, religion, and leadership were hallmarks of her family's upbringing. Namesake lambs weren't just for individuals, the public was informed. This was a ministry. It had a point. Their common legacy, Daystar, had always been based on principles, truth, and reverence for God, according to Rebecca. Yet at this moment, all felt unsteady. After months of formation, the fissures were now plainly visible. Within the family, at least everyone could see them. Even while Joni was busy getting ready for her new chapter with Doug Weiss, smiling in interviews, going on trips, the outside world saw her while delivering speeches. Chaos was brewing within the family. Nothing happened, not even a phone call or a discreet apology. Rebecca fought for what she believed in. Somebody had to speak out, she told herself over and again, and she was doing the right thing by remaining silent. Might have required her to compromise not just her personal beliefs, but also the heritage of her father. However, she had to admit that standing up had been costly. Implications extended beyond the realm of emotions. It made me feel alone. The longer she waited, the more she could feel the walls draw near. No one responded to her messages. Daystar meetings discreetly disregarded her presence in her seat. She felt as if her pivotal role in the ministry was becoming a distant memory. Rebecca, who had a comfortable background in front of the camera, and who had confidently performed on stage with her parents, now felt alienated from her own family. Jonathan, her brother and a former ally, was much quieter than normal as well. Within the ministry, he had his own conflicts to contend with. Rebecca was also reluctant to make his load even heavier. While his quiet continued to ache, it was less destructive. It was as though everyone had felt apprehensive about making a statement or taking a stand, so they proceed with caution. A profound sense of isolation washed over Rebecca in that stillness. She ceased to participate in gatherings and ceased to communicate. Images of Joni and Doug, beaming from set in Israel, appeared on every one of her social media accounts. Joking around with pastors and elders, the entire ministry seems to have forgotten about it. As if the significance of her voice had never been significant. Rebecca cared nevertheless in her heart. She worried about the viewers who had put their faith in her. For many years, Daystar, beyond interpersonal dynamics, she was concerned with the message's emphasis on spiritual responsibility and leadership, and the knowledge that her father's dream, the legacy of honesty and integrity he had dedicated his life to, was now encircled by so much strife, continued to weigh heavily on her. Still, the public tension wasn't the thing that troubled her the most. That was the individual setback. A sense that her mother had abandoned her and her life for a new beginning. Long ago, they were quite close, exchanging everything from hopes and prayers to jokes and tears, discussions for the years to come. Strangers to each other now, nevertheless. The only thing that rattled Rebecca's world was the utter quietness that reigned between them. Refraining from ministry and public life entirely, she spent more time alone. She was frequently at a loss for words when friends tried to describe how she felt. How can you break the news to someone that the people you previously trusted and the place you once called home are now completely unreachable? Rebecca questioned everything at times. Was her decision incorrect? Had she remained no sound? Should she have been content to accept things as they were and go on? She kept returning to the same fact, though, whenever she pondered those questions. The stillness would have devoured her. She raised her voice because she adored her loved ones, since she believed in a power greater than outward appearances, and could not passively witness the gradual rewriting of something precious. However, the agony persisted. Also, I felt like the future was completely blank. Rebecca felt lost and confused for the very first time. Joni and Doug were now working on a vision that would not work in the ministry, the family, or anywhere else. Some days she questioned whether her voice would ever be heard, whether her family would ever be complete.
whether the ministry could rediscover its founding principles, and whether her mother would ever look at her again, not as an adversary, but as a daughter merely seeking to safeguard what was important, would be the woman she had revered her entire life. No one could see what lay ahead. All that was provided were inquiries rather than assurances or plans. Could there ever be a time when is it feasible? Can the Lamb family ever get back together? Alternately, had the effects faded away? At the moment all Rebecca could do was move slowly, quietly, knowing that God was still at work, even in her times of solitude, healing and crafting a narrative that was left unfinished,